Hey Crosskart fans, let's mount a V-twin in a VF1 XL. What do you say? So this is the legendary Predator 670 V-twin. Sports over 20 horsepower. It's got that low end grunt of a twin, and it's been used extensively. Redbeard's Garage is a prime example of the potential of these motors. I love watching that guy, and I love his engine builds. That dude is so smart. And of course, Cars and Cameras with their 670. If you guys haven't seen their dragster, you have to go check out that whole build series. What an awesome adventure those guys had. Overpowering the snot out of a 670. So, I was originally going to put a TL1000 motor in this, but I've learned something recently that I like letting you guys drive my karts. I like you guys being able to experience what it's like to be behind the wheel of a Crosskart, and I can't let you drive a Crosskart that has 160 horsepower. My insurance won't cover it, mostly because there is no insurance. So I can build them safe enough with a low enough power plant to let you get behind the wheel and experience the fun without going 100 miles an hour, because every time you get in these, once you get it figured out that it's not gonna break, you just see how fast you can go, which is fine, absolutely fine. So originally I was gonna go with the Duramax 1000cc V-twin. Yeah, that would have been amazing. But the more I dug into it, the Predator 670 still has a 1-inch shaft. The Duramax 1000cc has a 1 1/8 shaft. Like, it's just enough different to where there's no aftermarket clutch support for it. I actually did find a Comet 780 that would fit the Duramax, and that clutch on its own was $1,000. Whoever did it must have machined this and just jacked the price up $700 for their hard work customizing it. It's frustrating, I know, for me too, but I do have a 670 clutch that fits the 670, and it's not overpriced at all. Driving it, I've got a 780 driver. Now this combination has a massive gear change. Talking less than 1-to-1 in its final drive. So the low RPMs of this motor are really gonna shine when paired up with this combination. Now also on this, I'm going to put a reverse gearbox. Now this is the one from eBay that you guys have seen. It's like $300, and it's already been proven in one of my other karts. So I know that this is a decent gearbox. It is the 40 series gearbox that has a max of 18 horsepower. Now, we are going to push that limit today. I've got an idea on how to make this a little more robust for a bigger engine, and only time is gonna tell if it is good enough. To me, the gears in here seem like they could be big enough to handle more of a load than 18 horsepower. So the biggest problem with this gearbox is that it outputs at a 2-to-1 ratio. This input shaft spins twice before the output shaft spins once. So it comes off the shelf with a 50% gear reduction. That is hard to gear around. It wouldn't be if we could just put a bigger front sprocket on it, right? So if we could put 17, 18, 22 sprocket on the front, we could compensate for that 50% gear reduction, but this housing is in the way. The biggest sprocket you can get on here is a 14 tooth, and man, it rides real close to there. So we will conquer that when we get to it. I have my other karts geared for it, but I'm hoping this is actually gonna compensate for that with its less than 1-to-1 gear ratio output. So exciting, let's get to it. All right, so you'll notice that I have my rear end installed, my axles run, my A-arms finished, and this thing is kind of a roller. Now you'll want to do this first. The correct build order for these is frame, front suspension, rear carrier and axles, rear A-arms, and then rear suspension. That will give you the offset from your sprocket, right? And if you put this in before you put these verticals in, you'll know exactly what chain clearances you're getting. These don't have to be at a set distance. It is adjustable in here. This is just where I ran it for this one, so I have a 1/2 inch spacer on my homebrew rear setup. That gives me chain clearance to run right over this upper A-arm mount, and it works out really great. This is really tidy in this area. You'll also notice that I haven't put my rear cross members in because I haven't mounted the motor yet, so I'm not sure exactly where I want to put them. These cross members should match and triangulate your engine mount, whatever you use. Now for this engine mount, I'm going to get my reverse gearbox sorted before I figure out the engine. I'm going to hard mount this in the back so it's its own removable item separate from the engine. The first thing you're going to want to do is align the sprockets. So get a good wag on where this is going to go and how your chain is going to clear this. So it's going to go about right there. We'll be able to change gears if we want, change gearing. We'll have clearance all around. And then from there, we'll line up the motor to the input shaft. For me, I have used wood on every single engine mock-up I have done. Wood is your friend. I have different thicknesses from 1 inch to standard 1.5. And I can just set my height where I want it. Set clearances. It looks like it's gonna be pretty good. We're clear of everything over here. The gearbox isn't gonna interfere, and we still have access to our fill valve, which is pretty slick. The gear shifter mechanism goes here. We'll be able to run the cables up. I kind of like it. So we have the wood holding it in place. I've set my clearance on the back side to about 1/8 of an inch, maybe 1/4 inch. And I need this distance from this mounting hole down to the frame where we're gonna mount it. And it looks like it's 2 3/4 right on the money. So I'm gonna start there, and the height adjustment on this is flexible by, I don't know, 1/4 inch, 3/4 of an inch. It doesn't have to be exactly perfect. I'm looking for a straight line across the tops of these and a straight line here with no obstacles in the way. So I keep a lot of 1/8 inch thick metal in stock, but this is a gearbox we're mounting, which we could use this, but in the end, we'd probably have to box it for strength, even if we used a big piece. And it's just safer to go a little thicker anyway. It doesn't add much weight. So I've had these 1/4 inch plates sitting on my shelf for a while. I haven't used them yet. And this seems like the perfect situation. I can get them both cut on one piece. It's going to be plenty strong, probably over strong, but that never hurts anything. So we just get our measurements that we took. So I always come in 5/8 of an inch off the edge, as you guys know. And our measurement was 2 3/4 from the base. So I'll mark 2 3/4 and 5/8. That's our first bolt hole. Now I'm gonna measure 5/8 off the top of this so I know my end point. So I'm basically just gonna have to cut 3/4 of an inch off the end of this. No big deal. Now the distance between the bolts was exactly 3 inches. So I come over 3 inches and I come up 2 3/4, and that's my second bolt hole. And I'll measure 5/8 off of this, and this will be where it gets cut off. There we go. 2 holes. This is our bracket. Probably round the corners just to make it look cool. Making it look cool is semi-important. Let's get it cut. All right, let's give our brackets a try, see how we did. I see something already. We have to make a recess to clear this drain bolt. Okay, We've got our brackets mounted. And I got a 3/16 piece of flat bar to put between this bar and the gearbox, which will help with spacing, help with alignment, help with welding. And then I'm just gonna eyeball these sprockets for alignment. And here's how we're gonna align it. So now you just take your flat bar and put it up against it, just like that. Things we're looking for in the gearbox is any kind of tilt on it or any kind of twist. And general fitment, see if we like how it's fitting in there. That is within a 1/16 of an inch. Perfect. And as a final check, you can get a chain and test the alignment that way. Make sure everything's groovy. Now, in my case, it's riding a little close to here, a little more than I wanted. When Dave and I built this frame, we were also making a frame to give away, so we kind of didn't measure this as much as we probably should have. Now, once you get it in its final spot, go ahead and tack weld it in place. Now, I'm not gonna lie to you, I fiddled with this for probably 20 minutes, getting the position of it perfect. I'm not gonna show it to you because it would be super boring. All right, 6 good solid tacks should hold this thing in place while we mock up the rest of everything. All right, so engine mounting. We need to figure out where in this big space we're gonna put this V-twin engine. Now, we have a V-twin engine with a transmission behind it, so this is going to be longer than if you just had a 670 Predator on its own or even an ATV engine on its own. So that's why I chose the V-twin for the XL. Now the other carts, all the carts will fit any engine. Now when you stretch the frames, that gives you extra engine compartment because your seat just goes forward. Your head is still gonna sit in the driver area, but your seat's obviously gonna be forward if you've got a 20-inch engine. But since this is the XL, it's already got 6 extra inches of driver compartment length, which translates into more engine room, which means this is going to be easy and there's still gonna be a ton of driver room. I'll just lay wood across here, stack it up as needed to figure out where my engine's gonna go. And I'm going to use a motor plate and I'm just gonna weld it right in so this can kind of help us gauge where our engine's gonna go. We can either put the entire engine forward of this or we can kind of stick it back a little higher. Now the CG is going to be a little higher, but only by 4 inches. That is not a drastic amount. And if we move this back, it'll give more room up here for maybe tools or accessories. This is going to be a trail machine, which is why we have the reverse gearbox. I don't know, let's just start with this, see how it works. Look how far back we can come with it. It's not too bad at all. How's it look over there? I'm just playing with y'all. I fit this all up before I started filming. Now, like I said, we do have the option. This oil filter is sitting about a 1/2 inch above the gearbox, so we could bring this forward and down, but our CD is going to change if we do that, and we're going to need to run a long belt. The distance between your primary and your secondary is your CD, and this is what you look up when you are getting the appropriate belt for your setup. Now, just to give you guys a quick visual of what a V-twin engine with a gearbox and person in an XL looks like. I'm gonna try to get in here without falling. Holy smokes, this frame is awesome. So I've got tons of room. I mean, that's my legs completely extended and my feet can almost touch the rack. And I'm pretty reclined as well. My comfortable driving position is this. I like to get my heels on that crossbar and I got the wheel and I got the pedals, but I don't know, maybe take a little different one. Legs down feels kind of weird to me. to be in a low machine like this. But I'm also probably going to raise the seat so that I can see over the dash. I'm not a tall guy. I'm 5'11 and a half. Let's see if I can sit up nice and straight. Yeah, so I still have tons of room. I can see over the dash. That's pretty good. All right, so now we're gonna make the forward motor mount part C41, but I'm gonna make 2 of them. That's the beauty of this stuff. I give you guys kind of the template, the outline, and the how-to, and then you can just take it and do whatever you want with it. Variable frame technology. It is supposed to be for you to decide alternate ways. Obviously, you can do it how I do it. It works out great, but that wasn't the idea I had. I wanted it to be for everybody. So I'm gonna make 2 of those, and I'm gonna make it out of 1.5 inches instead of out of 1.25 inches, and I'll show you why in a hot second. So time to get the bender back out. Now I don't get to use this thing enough, and I don't get to praise Rogue Fab enough. I'm not building a frame every time I'm out here, but this Rogue Fab bender has completely changed everything. So many guys like it, including me. This makes fabrication fun, right? And it's supposed to be fun. This is a hobby, right? We're building hobby things. So a hobby level bender that is this nice and this easy to use and this accurate. If you're building a VF1 or if you're building your own machine, definitely look into getting a Rogue Fab bender. It's amazing. Absolutely amazing. I love these guys and I get excited every time I get to use it. Let's get this bent up. Now, and speaking of Rogue Fab, they also have this tubing notcher that makes everything so much easier and fun when you're working in your garage. I love those guys so much. They don't sponsor me. I'm just a dude in the garage telling you guys, like, I like this. This works very well. Too easy, right? And also for the VF1 builders, if you're replacing 1.25 inches with 1.5 inch tubing anywhere, like I'm about to do, print your cut wrappers at 125%. It'll wrap around the tube nicely and everything will line up. All right, so this is an exact copy of C44. The other one is holding the seat up right now. So we'll get this in position. And by position, I mean the best place for it for our forward engine mount. Now, considerations for the engine. This has adjustable sliders on it. And I want to be able to utilize every bit of it in case we need to change belts, in case we just want to move the engine in general, or for belt tensioning. Now, the CD of CVT systems is very important. So having this adjustment up here and having adjustment on the rear chain is huge. Our gearbox is static, and it's the weakest part of this whole system because we have so much horsepower. So we have C44 in place. Now we need to take some measurements. Now, my plan is to use this motor plate and I'm going to weld it in permanently. And I'm not going to weld it to this flange. I want to weld it all the way across the underside of here along with this. So I'm gonna notch this out for the tube that we're gonna use. So we just need to measure from the top of our second C44 to a midpoint of a tube that would go under here. And this doesn't have to be perfect because we can use the angle of the tube to dial it in just right. In the end, we're going to make this level doing that. Now we also have to measure from back here because we're going to run our rear motor mount right here around this gearbox. This is long in case you need it tall, but obviously you can take all of this off if you need it short. It's designed that way on purpose. So I got it at 5 1/4. When making your notches, it's good to just do a final logic check and see, like, is this oriented to how it's going to be mounted? So I keep a scrap piece of tube around just to check that, and it has saved me a couple of pieces. All right, so this is why I made this out of 0120 1.5 inch. It is too wide to fit back here on this rear mount. Now, for normal engines without a gearbox, this whole area right here can be used for your rear motor mount, and it tucks it back here nicely. So you just need the forward motor mount to make everything work. But since we are doing a rear motor mount forward of a gearbox, we got to think outside the box a little bit. Luckily, this template was already in the plans, right? So I'm just going to measure where I want to mount it on the rear floor, cut it out, sleeve it, weld it. It'll be a super strong joint, plus this is super strong steel in the first place, and we'll have a rear engine mount. All right, so we said 10 inches, so we just measure outside to outside, which is 18 7/8-ish. We'll call it 19. So 19 to get to 10 would be minus 9 inches. So that actually makes sense because we're using a 4.5 inch CLR. So for every 90 degrees, it takes 4.5 inches of distance for the center line of the tube, right? So we're using 1.5 inches, so that adds an extra 3/4 to that. So it's 5.25 to that. So we are going to be right on this bend, which may make it a little tough to sleeve, but we'll tackle that when we get there. So I'm not gonna lie to you guys, when I was first picturing this motor mount, I was picturing something like that, right? That'd be pretty sweet, have nice wide top part, tons of weld. It was about the width of the engine plate, but our 10 inches of clearance in the back looks more like that, right? And we don't have enough to get a sleeve in here in a space, so we got to figure out how to make this strong. All right, so here's how I'm going to do it. I've got magnets holding my 10-inch gap. I've got my two 90-degree pieces and a piece of 1-inch sleeve. Now I cut this at the right length, so when there is an 1/8 inch gap, that all is touching and fits tightly. Now I would go through and rosette this, but it's a motor mount. These are 120, and that 1-inch piece on the inside is also 120. So all I got to do is get 3/4 of that connecting to these, and I personally will be happy with it. I've got my welder turned up pretty hot because this is some thick stuff, and I want to get that heat on the inside tube. All right, so we've got our pieces. It's time for a test fit. Wood just slides easily, so that's kind of locked in, and it's exactly where we want it. And same with the back. And it looks like it's going to work out. Oh. There we go. And it looks like it's going to work out really, really well. We have clearances everywhere. These are at very good angles. This angle is going to increase. Looks like we need to take a chunk out of the back of this so we can get this lined up in that meaty spot where we wanted it. Oh, this is really cool. So now we're going to pull the motor, and we're actually going to bolt it to this motor plate, but after we take this rear chunk out for it. There we go. Now I have not welded this bar in because we can also use it to fine tune exactly where we want this motor plate to land on our motor mount. All right, so now I can just do a mock-up with just the motor plate, and you can see I've cut these corners off for clearance, and also I've removed the paint from areas I plan to weld. So the idea here is the height and placement of the tubing, obviously. So front end looks really good, and this back end, it seems like we can do that. We can move that to kind of cinch it up. And we can also make sure it is level. I think what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna tack these three pieces in place, but not the motor mount, we have the front and back and the height accomplished, and we've leveled this and squared it. So we got to get rid of this wood so we can bolt the motor to the plate, and a tack should be strong enough to just hold it in place while we get the final alignment done. I think they'll hold for an engine, if they'll hold me. Whew. It's a big boy. All right, so the motor is mounted to the motor plate and we can make adjustments to it. So we are checking for straight line alignment, forward and back. Now on the motor plate, I have it bolted in so that you have adjustment. I have 1.5 inches of aft movement and like 4 inches forward. It's just how the motor plate worked out. Now remember that CD I was talking about? You want to measure from the center to center, and looks like it is 9 3/4, right? So I printed out a sheet here. You can see we're using a 780 drive clutch. We have a 780 secondary. Double check your diameter, 9.26, right? So this is the range of belts. We can go from 7.3 inches apart all the way up to 11.07 inches apart, and there will be a belt that'll fit it. All we have to do is get it close to one of these and use the motor to adjust for belt slippage. And you can see all center distances are approximate due to belt tolerances. So every time we change a belt, we may have to adjust the motor by, I don't know, 1/8, 1/16 of an inch just for a different belt, or just to tune it so it's perfect. So at 9.75, looks like this 9.62 belt is gonna work out just fine. 363 for Charlie. So once we have that, we can actually put our clutch in place. Now, I'm going to run a bearing here. I'll explain this now. So I believe the weak point of this gearbox, since it's a divorced gearbox, when this engine pulls, I'm gonna put a washer too. When the engine turns, it pulls these two together. So this shaft is wanting to pull out of the gearbox, and this whole casing and everything could be the weak point of it. So by putting a bearing here, we can run a bracket to the engine plate so that this shaft is not reinforced by the gearbox, but it's reinforced by a rigid point on the cart, making this whole setup a lot stronger. So get our secondary on there, and then we can align the motor left to right. Now, as far as that goes, of course, there is another handy dandy thing. Now, you should look this up for whatever motor you're using and whatever drive system you're using. This gives you the exact distances you need between things. And if you look, I actually don't run my secondary backwards like this. Well, correctly. I don't run my secondary correctly. Let's put it that way. Because the drive force on the outside of that shaft, I think, is going to be too much, and it would put my secondary hanging out way past the cart, and I like it to be tidy in here. So just having this hanging off, instead of that, if we had it like that, this whole engine would be sitting pretty far off center, and I like the engine to be right in the middle. That is the only reason I do that. That graph could mean running your clutch inverted as well, depending on how you look at it. That would do the same thing. The engine would be offset pretty far that way. It's basically lining up the center of the secondary to the center of the front so that the belt drives straight. So that's what we're going to shoot for. I'm sure there is some tolerance to this. Of course. So the motor is offsetting enough that we need to trim the back corner off of that motor plate so that it'll clear our mounting bracket. That is going to work out very, very nicely. I probably cut a little too much off. I could cut this loose and move the whole bar forward. That's why we just tacked that. But we're gonna get tons and tons of weld across that plate. It's gonna be super rigid. We'll be able to gusset this, get a ton of weld in there as well. That's a slick setup. Here's what our alignment looks like back here. Very nice and tidy. Everything is within the frame. Looks like there might be a little bit of a tilt, but maybe not sure. I'm going to get this absolutely perfect off camera. Then we're gonna weld that motor plate in. Pretty cool. Now, if you want to make a bracket for this bearing, I'm going to make it so it's replaceable. So I have a piece of 1.5" tubing. This is a, I think maybe 7/8 diameter or 3/4 inch outside diameter bearing and a 3/4 inch inside diameter bearing. It's got a little flange on it so everything rides smoothly on the bearing, but it is just a touch too big for this tubing. So I'm gonna die grinder it, see how that works. Voila! Now we could press it in or we could keep die grinding it, but it being pressed in, we can remove the bracket, press the bearing out, and then press a new one in if it ever goes bad. Alright, so in case you didn't catch up with the montage, this is how I made the bracket. This is 3/16, and I just used some cardboard to figure out where to bend this to get the right offset. And then I just used it in my vise with a small sledgehammer to get it bent. It is extremely primitive, I agree, but it works. Now, I was going to put 2 bolts in here, but I punched it a little close. I didn't realize these were 17mm heads. And I decided that it only needs 1 because this isn't going up or down. It's got 2 bolts holding that, so it's not going to want to rotate. This bracket is literally just to keep this from wanting to twist and come forward. It reinforces and strengthens all of this stuff we just made. Now, as a bonus, we have an extra mounting hole right here. We could make a bracket that comes off of our motor plate to capture that 3rd mounting point. And I'm not sure if I'm gonna do it or not. This is pretty simple and pretty easy and pretty slick. And with this bracket, it's incredibly strong. You could probably lift the whole cart by this shaft. So we'll check our final fitment. It's so nice. Now I do want to point out one last thing I did. If you notice, these are exactly flush with each other. I did that on purpose. We can't move this in and we can't move this in, but all of these kits come with spacers so we can move it out to fine tune that area. Just keep an eye on how much thread you have remaining on your bolt, and you can perfectly tune your CVT for good engagement. Good engagement like this is what you need to do burnouts, so your belt doesn't slip. All right, so let's take a look at the final mount up. That is tidy. Gearbox, chain-driven rear end. Everything fits very well. Look at the space under the motor for accessories. And it's going to be easy to get to those motor mount bolts just in case. Plenty of clearance from the seat. I know you can't really tell because that bar is right there, but yeah, it's going to be a comfy ride. Oh, I can't wait. So that's it for this one. One Predator V-twin mounted up. Now with the mods to that engine, the sky is kind of the limit with the VF1 XL so far. Oh, I'm loving this one so much. The beefy shocks, the high ground clearance, the 25-inch tires. The way this thing is set up, I can't wait to get it out on the trails. And all the room in here is gonna make this thing so comfortable. Oh, I love it. So next time on the channel is gonna be my favorite episode, and that's driver fit up. We have all kinds of room in this cockpit to just make it however we want to make it. Ah, this is such a good one. Takeaways from this episode: don't be afraid to dive in and experiment. We're working with metal, so as long as you have a little bit of stock of metal, you can fab things up, make mistakes, restart or adjust, cut things loose, re-weld them. I always say the hardest part is to start, so just dive in, start bending something, start welding something, make a tab. Once you get into that groove, it gets natural, and before you know it, you have completed your task for the day. Now, you guys wanting to know how long it takes to build one of these, I spent about 5 hours making that engine mount, all included, but I was also filming, so it's kind of hard to gauge it because I have to pause between every step and set up the camera, make sure you guys get a good shot and get to see how I'm doing it. So that probably takes an extra hour to do all of that. So I'd say a good 4 hours of work to mount your engine. So dive in, get started, and until next time, enjoy the build.